Okay, so we're back for card allotment part 2, and there was something that I wanted to talk about from yesterday. So let's jump to a card allotment. Hillspot. I don't know if you would have caught this. Probably not. It'd be difficult. I mean, I understand that trying to understand this game just from me talking about it in bits and pieces must be very difficult. And, you know, that's okay because it's not necessary. But if you were able to kind of follow how these captains are revealed from the deck every 10th card, then you might have caught that this ability. You may reveal the top 2 cards of your opponent's faction deck, then place them at the top or bottom of the deck. Could be devastating, because if a captain was revealed this way, and I changed this to reveal, it used to be look at, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it's reveal. If a captain was revealed and you placed it on the bottom of the deck, that captain would not come out for a really, really long time because, you know, there's enough cards in the deck where presumably you would never use the entire deck in a game. And I'm probably going to add that little contingency, you know, that if the deck runs out, it's an end condition for the game. Just because it would be weird to continue to play. I mean, you could continue to play. You still have a deck. You still could work off the opponent's cards in the active field. Or even if both decks ran out, you still could continue to play until someone finally defeated the commander. But, you know, it would really be weird to take out the deck building part of this deck building game. You know, and I don't know. I always think, you know, there's these like weird edge case scenarios that come to mind, like, you know, people keeping a game going indefinitely. I don't know who would do this, but I believe you should put something in to make sure it can't happen. So if someone just decided, hey, I'm never going to beat your commander, and their opponent said, well, I'm never going to beat yours either, we're just going to play this game for the rest of our lives, you know, until there's like just like, you know, 2 chairs with skeletons sitting in it, you know, around this table playing this game. Okay, so I mean, we don't want that to happen, and so we have to make sure the game ends. So probably if the decks run out, the game should end, and we'll just tally up victory points and go on our way. Okay, there, do what you got to do here, buddy. All right, the computer's doing what it's got to do. Yeah, so, but if this captain goes to the bottom of the deck, it's going to just be ridiculous. Now, you probably wouldn't put an opponent's captain on the bottom of the deck because you're trying to defeat their captains to make your way to their commander, and then defeat their commander to end the game. But if you felt like you were really behind on victory points, you may be like, hey, let's keep this thing going until I could catch up, and, you know, artificially extend the game out. We want these captains to come out when they're supposed to come out. So, captains revealed this way must be placed on top. Okay, so you can't mess around with the captains if you happen to, you know, hit on this ability while there are still captains to be found. Now, this used to say you may look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's faction deck, because I thought, you know, we said that Hillspot represented a lookout, right? A place where you can kind of gather information from up high and kind of get a lay of the land on what's going on. So that would be an advantage you have, not an advantage that your opponent has. So you should be able to see what's going on, but they shouldn't. So by looking at the top 2 cards of their deck but not revealing them, you would have information that they don't, and whatever you did with those cards, they wouldn't know what cards you did that with. All right, that would be preferable. However, if you don't reveal the cards, then we don't really know what you found. And if you did find a captain, we would never know about it, and you could be messing around. Now, I don't like to really worry too much about cheating, because I think it's ridiculous. I mean, you know, we're all adults. These games aren't for kids. It would be ridiculous. But, you know, I'm in a very different scenario. I don't play with strangers generally. Not that I wouldn't. It just doesn't come up. But people do. People play, you know, in different situations. And, you know, you never know who you're going to run into, you know. So this way, if you reveal the cards, there's no room for any kind of, you know, shenanigans. Okay, so that was the first thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about was just, you know, and this is a style choice, but how I go about naming things. You know, some people, I don't know if you ever use like a fantasy name generator. And, you know, you get these names like, you know, Thoragranim and, Phaleodon, and these names, I've always had trouble remembering them. I prefer to use names that are somewhat descriptive and recognizable, if not obvious, and I think that's cool. I think it helps you remember things. I don't think it's an issue. I don't think it disrupts, your ability to suspend disbelief or anything like that. I do try to give them names that seem like they could have evolved naturally, because if you think about it, a lot of the names that we have for places, whether it's a street name or a town name or something like that, seem to have evolved naturally. Birchwood Lane, because of the kind of trees that were in that area, or my town is called Maspeth, which is the name of a Native American tribe that was here at the time, I suppose, in the 1600s. Doonesboro, it's kind of a dune-ish place, like a sandy kind of place. Burrow, there are like cave dwellings there and whatnot. Dawn's Crest is an interesting story, and I don't want to kind of spend too much time on this, but there's Cantonfields, which is in the west, and Dawn, which is in the east. And there's these mountains between the two. Dawn's Crest is situated atop those mountains. And the elves have like stained glass windows at Dawn's Crest. And when the sun rises in the east, it's behind the mountains for the people in Cantonfield. So their first glimpse of the sun comes through the windows of Dawn's Crest. And it creates kind of a, you could see I wrote about it here. So, there's some logic to it, how these names evolve. But at the same time, they enable you to kind of remember something about these places. All right, so that's a style choice, and that's something to think about when we're talking about how do we name things. Do you want to just kind of come up with random fantasy names? A lot of people do, and that adds some mystique to the world. But I prefer to take this approach, so you'll notice that throughout. Okay, so let's continue on, because today we're talking about the Champions of Redimere and what cards the good guys have in this game. And of course, that all depends upon your point of view. Maybe you think the orcs have a point, that men and elves are covetously, keeping the resources to themselves in this area, and that, So, that's up to you. But we're going to start with the tactics cards. There's no equipment here for the faction cards. And the faction cards are cards that are going to go into the deck regardless of whether you're playing the men, the elves, or the dwarves. These are going to go into the deck if you're playing any of the champions faction groups. Okay. So high ground. Reveal the top card of the opponent's faction deck. If it is a location or captain, return it to the deck and draw 2 extra cards during your discard draw card step. Otherwise, you may destroy it to gain 1 influence. This INF is influence. Influence is a token that you're going to get. And you're going to be able to spend that token to activate captain abilities. All right? And perhaps there'll be other cards that use that. But they're going to be things that you have in small quantities. You might have 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. And so if you notice that this is very similar to what we saw at Hillspot, because this is high ground. So it's kind of like an advantage from being higher up. So again, you're going to reveal, except this time it's going to be 1 card from the faction deck of your opponent. A location or captain has to go back. We didn't say that over here. We said you can kind of we said captains have to go back, but we didn't say locations had to go back here. You kind of want locations to come out because there's only 2 in each faction deck, which, that could change, of course. We might wind up with more. We'll see how it plays out when we play test it, are these locations coming out or not. I just didn't want too many out at one time because table space, basically, and just complexity, because when you put this out, again, you could fortify it. So you're going to have, if you have 2 for each faction and they all came out, you'd have 4 cards with other cards next to them fortifying those locations. That's in addition to your 2 lineups in the active field. The decks that are there, the destroyed pile. Each player has their own deck and discard pile in addition to a captured pile. So there's a lot going on. This thing could really, get kind of big. So I didn't want there to be too many locations, but if they're not coming out, that could be a problem as well. I also thought about maybe putting locations, into those top 40 cards. Maybe making sure that they're coming out, within the time frame that the captains are coming out. This is all stuff that we're going to see in playtesting. Okay, at this point, these numbers are all subject to change. How many of this and how many of that. So that's gonna affect whether or not we need to say locations must also be placed back on top. If we find there's a problem getting them out, then we're going to want to make sure we kind of enforce that a little bit. Okay, yeah, we never talked about the units from the neutral cards, but they're not really a big deal. We just have the Merchant of Zorn. This is a new race. It's from a different area. They're basically pirates. And he's going to just kind of give you a discount on stolen equipment. And then the Skitter Skim, which we looked at last time, is just like kind of a ravenous beast who eats equipment. And gives you kind of it gets enraged when it eats, kind of. So it's going to give you a bonus to your combat if it's under your control when it eats a card. Okay, so yeah, so High Ground is going to kind of give you an advantage of kind of getting a peek at the opponent's deck. But if it's a location or a captain and you kind of get screwed on this ability, like you look and then you don't get to do anything with it, you're going to get to draw 2 extra cards during your discard draw card step. And that's to say that you had the opportunity to look out and now, let's say have an advantage. Have a little bit more information, have a little bit more at your disposal going forward. So you saw the location, you saw the captain, and now you're going to prepare for that with these 2 extra cards. But if it's not a location or a captain, then you may destroy the card to gain 1 influence. So either way, you're going to get something out of this. The High Ground is going to give you some advantage. Okay. Now we're into the units. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting because you get to develop characters, you get to kind of figure out who these characters are, what their role is in the world. We're going to begin with Artemis Harrow, who's a man from Dawn, but say a traveling writer and scholar. Harrow's accounts are widely regarded as both fascinating and reliable. Artemis Harrow was in Bankston, coincidentally, at the time when the Orctide occurred. So he wrote extensively on his experiences during this, and basically is responsible for the premier history of this event in the future. Right now, Artemis Harrow is in the world trying to survive. Okay, so he's going to give you 3 cunning, because he's, very, very smart guy, able to survive. He's been in a lot of tricky situations as he's been out in the world as a traveling scholar, kind of like a journalist who goes into, war territory and catches the scoop and whatnot. So he's got to have some cunning about him to have made it this far in his career. But you see he's got the 4 defense relative to the 5 cunning. So to recruit him is going to be 5 cunning. But to kill him off is going to be less because he's not a warrior. He also offers no combat. Oh, this is very important. On units, combats and cunning are combat and cunning is not something that the card is going to contribute in total. You're going to have to choose between which one you want to use at any given moment. So if a card does have both combat and cunning, you're going to get to use one or the other, not both. Okay, because it's just going to be whatever that unit is doing at the time. Is it fighting or is it doing something else? This one does not provide you with that choice. It only has 3 cunning. It can't be used to fortify. And then here we have proficiencies, because equipment in this game is going to work kind of like Thunderstone, where it has to be attached to a unit. But not every unit could use every piece of equipment. If you have a piece of magical, equipment, a regular warrior may not know how to use it. proficiencies reflect a specialty, an area of focus. So there's only 3: melee, ranged, and magic. So to keep it kind of simple, because you don't want this to get out of control, because equipments are only a small part of the cards that are in the deck. And if you had too many proficiencies in different types of equipment, you'd wind up with too many dead cards in your hand because you can't match up the right combination. So a lot of times you're going to see multiple proficiencies on units, allowing them to, melee and range is a common one that they can maybe use both, and it's also going to depend on the faction. The elves use more ranged, as you may imagine. The blood orcs use more melee. They like to really get in there, so different factions have more, magic proficiency. Some don't have any at all, so, or at least very little. So that's part of the game that we haven't spoken about yet. And here we have an assault ability, which we spoke about last time. Cannot participate in assault. So Artemis Harrow is not going to be like, storming the keep. But you may discard this unit to acquire a basic unit and place it in your hand. So basically, Artemis, as you can imagine, as like a rider, he's not going to fight in the assault. What's he going to do? He's going to go run for help. He's going to go get somebody and be like, hey, you got to come over here. There's something going on, right? So you can discard him when it comes to be assault time and go get a basic unit and place it in your hand. Now, the basic units, if you remember from the first video, I believe it was, during the setup, they're a stack of cards apart from the faction deck. They're kind of like, let's say, I guess you can think of it almost like a training card in Dark Gothic, or a kick card in the DC deck builder. It's kind of like this card you can go to and get when you can't really get anything else. They usually have a low cost, but their cost is dependent on the faction leader, and we'll talk about that later. But a basic unit will be a stack of cards that's just there. So you can discard him to go grab a basic unit and place it in your hand. So not only are you going to get help, you're adding that card now to your deck. So you're gaining a card. Alright, VP1, you're not going to get a lot of accolades for whacking Artemis Harrow. Now we have a Defiance Civilian, okay? From Bankston, presumably, but anywhere in Cantonfields, some of the men are, going to stand up to the orcs. So, costs 3 cunning, doesn't cost you much, doesn't give you much combat. They, coming out with a pitchfork or a shovel or something like that, but they are there to help. It only costs 2 to take them out. They're not warriors, they're not armored, they can't fortify, they don't have proficiencies per se. Destroy this card from your hand to prevent the capture of 1 unit in the active field. This is a Defiant Civilian, someone who's going to stand in the way and say, no, stop. So, but of course it's probably not going to work out for them because they're not in a position to really defend. But they are heroic. So, if they get in the way, they're going to take the hit, destroy this card to prevent the capture of 1 unit in the active field. And here we have an excerpt from Dawn of Thunder by Artemis Harrow. So you see, we were talking about last time wrapping the flavor text back into the game. We said Artemis Harrow was a traveling writer and scholar, and he later on wrote the premier historical account of the Orctide, and the title of that account is Dawn of Thunder, because the orcs arrived at dawn in the late spring of this year. Alright, so let's read it quickly. Many fled their homes in terror, scattering into the wild. Yet even amongst the screams and frantic footfalls there could be seen a defiant few. Anchored by their resolve, their bravery prevailed in the face of the advancing hordes. Okay, so, this is, written in the style that we imagine Artemis would employ. Now, I do have some long flavor text at times, but remember, most of this stuff is all going to be in icons. So there'll be an icon with a numeral on it, representing all of this. Fortification is just a little parapet icon. So these things aren't going to be taking up much room. It's basically going to be a picture. It's going to have this sentence, and then it's going to say all of this. So there should be room for it. We'll see when the time comes. I do like to make flavor text an important part of the game, though, because, like I said, in deck building especially, you need to do everything you can to elicit that theme, because you don't have some of the things available to you that you would have in other kinds of adventure games and things like that. So this is a way of doing that. And if you play this game a couple of times, you'd recognize Artemis Harrow. You'd start to get a sense of what's going on. Probably in my rule books, I would include a little something at the back of the book, a couple of pages, kind of going through the history and stuff, because I feel like it's important, especially in this Recitals of Redimere series, because all my other games take place in the world, and these historical events like the Orctide or these other wars that have happened are more of a backdrop, a setting. You don't actively participate in those things. They're things that are going on in the world currently, or they're things that are historical at the time that you play, but you're not usually taking place in them directly. Recitals of Redimere is letting you do the thing. It's letting you get in there and experience that historic event. So theme is very important to it. It's kind of really based on that idea of exploring the history of the world. So I want to make sure that that comes out. Yeah, and here we just have, I was thinking of Attack on Titan, Mikasa. Her kind of attitude, her strength, her resolve. That's kind of, who I had in mind when I was thinking of this Defiance Civilian. Okay, so yeah. Now, the Powderwood Trail Hunter. We talked about Powderwood last time, that there are elves there, and, there are rangers of sorts within those woods. And so the Trail Hunter, you see the proficiencies, melee, ranged, magic. So as we said, giving them the availability, making them available to use the various equipments in the game. When a unit is recruited by an opponent, you may place this card into their discard pile. If an opponent has this card in their hand at the beginning of their action phase, they immediately destroy one other unit in their hand and place this card into the active field. Now, this is a very unique mechanism, but I really like this card because I think it brings across what the Trail Hunter is able to do, which is to track an enemy. And we said, in Powderwood, visibility is poor, and he's kind of skulking around, and this poor orc don't even know it, And then eventually, boom, he springs out and takes him out. So he's going to go hunting in the opponent's deck. So he goes into the discard pile, gets shuffled in with his cards, and then when he comes out in the same hand with another unit, he's going to whack that unit, and then he's going to move on. So he's going to go back to the active field to become available again. So there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, he's going to go into the opponent's discard pile. Now, the opponent has an opportunity to catch him and kill him before he does this. If he has something that allows him to destroy a card in his discard pile, he can go get him. If he doesn't, then he's going to succeed in what he's trying to do. Remember, this happens at the beginning of their action phase. So if they have a card that says destroy a card in your hand, it's going to be too late, because this is going to happen before that. He's got to get him while he's in the discard pile, or if he has a way of getting him while he's in the deck, which right now there aren't any cards like that. Again, deck searching is not really going to appear often. We have one card so far, Dawn's Crest, that allows you to search a deck. But there may be others, so we'll see how that plays out. But also, after he succeeds, he catches his quarry, right? And then he's going to be placed into the active field again. So you're going to buy him for 5 cunning. You can use him for his combat, or you can use him for his cunning, 2. It's a moderate amount, but it's a little bit better than what you have to start the game, which is 1. Plus he has both, which gives him a little versatility. But if you do choose to use him for this reason, to get into somebody's deck, after he does it, he's going back to the active field. You got to buy him again. Okay, so he does his thing. He succeeds in his mission. You want to kind of hire him again. You're going to have to buy him again. He's back in the active field. So a very interesting card. I like the way this one works. He's only worth 1 VP if you get him. So his defense is equal to his cost. There's nothing particular about him. But he's more about stealth. He's not going to just stand there and take the hits. So, you could recruit him for 5, but the enemy could kill him for 5 if they catch him. Okay, so that's what's going on with the Powderwood Trail Hunter. And remember, these cards are available to any faction. Okay? Any faction group of the champions. Veteran of the Border Blight Skirmish. This is a dwarf from foreign lands. He doesn't have combat. He has cunning because he's very old. The Border Blight skirmish happened a very long time ago. He's a very, very old dwarf. His fighting days are behind him. But he does have some cunning to him. Probably should have a little more, but we'll see what's going on with this in a minute. He can fortify. This represents the little parapet icon I want to use for fortification. He doesn't have proficiencies because he's not going to be using equipment. He's not magical. He's no longer able to wield a sword or a bow or anything like that. All other ally units gain +1 common, +1 cunning. So you see, he only has the 2 cunning, but he's going to grant common cunning to everybody else. He's inspirational, and he can also teach combat tactics, give advice. So combat's going to go up. And cunning, he has a lot of experience. He's going to be able to say things, advise the younger warriors on what to do. So he's going to bolster everybody when he's around. And you see, very old dwarf, milky-eyed, Yoda-like, with knobbed cane, holding on to a larger man with face out of scene for support. So in other words, there's he's a dwarf, there's maybe a bigger guy who you can't see in the frame who's kind of helping him walk. Okay? So the Border Blight skirmish, a 6-day conflagration of violence between dwarves of disparate clans. The bloody resolution of the Border Blight skirmish marked the ending days of racially segregated townships in the dwarf lands. Okay, so this is like a border dispute between... I kind of was inspired to this by something I had read. I'm interested in American history, especially... American slavery and the Civil War. And one of the books, I believe it was a fictional book, was describing this kind of like Southern family feud. And there was some discrepancy on the borders. Actually, no, you know what? I don't think it was fictional. I think it was Solomon Northup's account, from the movie 12 Years a Slave. Yeah, I believe it was in his book, talking about this border dispute between these 2 plantation owners, and so I got this idea of dwarves in this kind of a situation, kind of these two wealthy dwarves, and I think we have it here in the lore book. Let's go down to the Border Blight skirmish. Yeah, here it is. A short but fierce dwarvish conflict over borders in their own lands, instigated by a feud between 2 wealthy dwarf families, it soon escalated into a heated and racially charged public debate, leading to a 4-day rampage of violence. Okay, so this was something that kind of just came about, started with just maybe these 2 families, and then others got involved with it as they took sides, and then we call it the Border Blight skirmish. It was kind of a blight on the history of the dwarves, but, a lot of times historically these things are necessary to make progress. And so from here, it kind of highlighted because of the death toll and the things that happened. These were regular citizens, these aren't armies at war. So these were families that were destroyed during this 4-day rampage of violence. And so it saddened everybody, obviously. And, in the aftermath, you get heated in the moment, but then in the aftermath, when all the dust settles, it's kind of like, what are we doing? We can't have this happen again. And so this kind of broke down some of the segregation relative to the clans, maybe rich and poor, or, racially inspired and whatnot. Okay, so you see how this one card speaks to a lot of lore, speaks to the history of the world, and so something like the Border Blight skirmish you'd want to describe that somewhere in the back of the book, just briefly like I did there in the lore book, just a little paragraph to let you know what it is and give this game some context. So when you put it to the table, you're like, wow, yeah, this is this guy from this part of history, from this part of the world, and, and here he was, for whatever reason in Bankston, maybe he came to advise on purpose. Maybe he was just there. Maybe he retired to Bankston, for whatever reason, or who knows what brought him there. People wind up all over the place in the world, So just this one little card gives you this little bonus, but there's a lot going on with him behind the scenes, Okay, so now we're getting into the group cards. So those were the cards that are going to go into the faction deck for any of the champions. And now we're getting into the group cards. Now, the Cantonfield Brigade is basically the men, all right? Because Cantonfields is overall a land of men. There are dwarves there from foreign lands, but it's not, equally inhabited by dwarves. And the elves kind of moved off to Dawn's Crest. They're still in the area, but they're not really generally seen or living amongst the people. Mostly what you see here are men. So the Cantonfield Brigade is the men faction. And here I just have some notes about this faction. Unit defense usually equals cost, and they have many proficiencies. Okay, so as typically thought of like in RPGs about men, they're somewhat versatile, adaptable, kind of like, in Super Mario Brothers 2, they would be Mario. He could jump okay, he could run okay, he could do everything pretty well, but he doesn't excel at any one particular thing. Okay, so they're basic units. So each faction group is going to have 3 basic units. And those 3 basic units are going to make up 10 cards. So here you have 3 of the Athletic Champion, you have 3 of the Augurer of Omens, and you have 4 of the Zealous Squire. Alright, and that's going to make up your 10 cards. They're going to be randomized. And so when you buy a basic unit, you're going to get a random one. Okay, so you can imagine, let's say, again, I'm just using the DC deck building game because it's the most obvious thing to go to for reference, because it's what inspired this game to begin with. So when you go to buy a kick card in that game, you know what you get. You get +2 power for a cost of 3. In this game, you don't know what you're going to get. You know one of the 3, but you don't know which one. Now, generally, they're all useful to a minor degree. I think they're a little better than kick cards, though, because again, you're paying a higher price in the randomization. You don't know what you're going to get, so that's a cost. You see what I'm saying? And so you should be rewarded for that cost, and you get a little bit something better because you're not picking what you get. So if I'm going to get something random, I want it to be good because it may not be what I wanted. So it better be good if it ain't going to be what I wanted. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so the Athletic Champion. Now, in this world, sports are generally played by the females. So the Athletic Champion is a female unit, very strong, very capable, 2 combat and 1 cunning, okay, because sport takes both. The defense is 2, equal to their calm, like we said. Unit defense usually equals calm with the men. She's able to fortify. She has melee and ranged proficiency, and she has an assault ability. This unit cannot be destroyed. Very dexterous, very able to dodge, get out of the way, very used to a competitive environment whereby she has to, kind of protect herself. It's like in boxing or wrestling, a huge part of it is not getting hit, not getting trapped. That's fundamental before you could do any damage to your opponent. So she's able to kind of get out of the way. This unit cannot be destroyed in assaults. She figures her way out of that melee and protects herself. All right, so VP1 for the Athletic Champion. Augurer of Omens gives you some magic proficiency. Okay, so +2 cunning. You're not going to get any combat out of it, but you're going to get +2, which is better than what you had with your Guile card, which is just a +1 cunning. 1 defense, though. Because this is a magic character, so it's not very able to withstand physical attacks. It can be used to fortify. Reveal the top card of the opponent's faction deck. You may purchase it or return it to the top of the deck. So the Augurer is going to let you see what's there and then do something about it. So you can actually purchase that card. Now remember, a purchase when you're buying your own cards means you take it into your deck. You put it into your discard pile and it comes up in your deck later. To purchase an opponent's unit means to capture it. To purchase an opponent's equipment is to destroy that piece of equipment. To purchase an opponent's tactic is to, what do I want to say, evade that tactic. Not evade specifically, but to kind of circumvent that tactic or put the kibosh on that tactic, right? So you may purchase a card from the opponent's faction deck here, which would probably mean either destroying or capturing something, or you may not be able to purchase it. You may not have the resources available, so then you would just return it to the top of the deck. You may also choose to return it to the top of the deck because you want it to come out. Maybe you think it's not going to help very much. Maybe there's some other reason why you want that card to come out. You also may want to put it back because you don't want to expedite the arrival of their captain. Because again, captains are coming out every 10th card. If you purchase this card, that's 1 less turn it's going to take for that captain to come out. And when captains come out, they have abilities that hurt your faction. So there's a lot of considerations in whether or not you'd want to make this purchase, whether or not you can make this purchase. It's ironic because, you know, it's coincidental, really, that we have a lot of things here where we're looking at the top of the opponent's faction deck. That's not really a huge part of what you get with a lot of these cards. It just seems to be the ones that we've been seeing so far. But I guess in this case we would have to mention again, no, we wouldn't, about the captain, because we want to make sure the captains are coming out and all of that. Well, you may purchase it, or you may return it to the top of the deck. Purchasing a captain means capturing the captain. So if you reveal that captain, and you can actually pay for it in that moment, then go for it. That means that captain's never going to come out. He's never going to do his arrival effect. He's never going to grant the benefits that he grants to his faction. So this could be a very powerful card if it comes out at the right time. And if you combine this with, let's say, Hill Spot, right, which lets you look at the top two cards and put them on the top or bottom, I believe is what it did, right? Let's take a quick look there. Reveal the top two cards, effect, and place them on the top or bottom. So if you were at Hill Spot and you activated that ability, and then you wound up with the Augurer in your hands, you would be able to put the captain back on top of the deck and then clip it, right? If you knew you had the resources. And he's going to help you with that with the 2, although, no, most of the time you need combat to defeat the captains. So he's not going to help you with that, but he does have a magic proficiency, which means you might have a magic equipment that he can use to help with this. Okay, so some interesting interplay there as we're thinking about combos and things like that. And then the last basic unit for the Cantonfield Brigade is the Zealous Squire. So he's only got 1 common, 1 cunning, but he does have both, which makes him a little bit better than the Might or Guile cards would only have one or the other. Only 1 defense. He's real easy to whack, but again, he's not going to come out in the active field, so that opportunity is not going to arise as often. He is able to fortify. He's got the melee and range proficiencies, and when you recruit this unit, you may place it into your hand instead of your discard pile because he's zealous. Okay, so he's looking to get into the fray. So when you recruit him, you put him right into your hand. Okay, now you notice that the cost on these is 0, and that's because costs are going to be based on the faction leader. It's not going to be based on the price of the actual card. So now, I don't have any faction leaders for the Cantonfield Brigade yet. As we go down and we see some other faction leaders, you're going to see that they have an indication on their card of how much they pay for basic units. So you might have one faction leader that pays 4 for basic units, and another faction leader that only pays 2. Alright, and it plays into whatever abilities they have and stuff like that. So the cost of these is going to vary from game to game depending on which leader you chose. Okay, so we're at 37 minutes here. Wow, okay. Let's see. Yeah, alright, we don't have too much. Let's just run through these real quick. Okay, so those are the basic units. Now we have Bertram Moore. He's a specific person. An unsung hero of the Orctide, his invaluable contributions are universally known to his colleagues. Choose a unit. That unit contributes both Calm and Cunning. So we said you had to choose between the 2. Bertram lets you get the most out of your men. Okay, so he's gonna bump up whoever's with you in a sense by allowing them to use both. This could be very powerful. He only does it to 1 unit because it would get out of control if he did it to everybody who was in your hand, let's say. Defense is 5 combat, whereas his cost is 6. He's more of an officer. You see, he's only got 1 combat and 3 cunning, so he's more of in a support role, but he does have the melee and range proficiency. And then we have the captains. Okay, so Calgrim the Bindbreaker. You might have noticed his quote on the Might card. Okay, he is a legendary figure. He was captured by orcs and single-handedly made his way out of that situation. Okay, so let's just go real quick over here. Calgrim the Bindbreaker. Formidable human warrior, kind of like Conan is how I imagine him, who etched his name into the lore books of legend on multiple occasions, but gained his moniker due to an unfathomable escape during the early stages of the Orctide. Held captive by Concord orcs and bound for transport with a 100-foot rope and shackles upon his ankles, the legend tells of him breaking loose via raw power alone and killing over 40 orcs during his escape, many of them while weaponless, and all of them while half-starved and unarmored. Okay? You can pause if you want to read the rest of this to find out what happened with him. But Calgrim is, kind of a hero of legend. And he's going to be one of the captains, okay? When he arrives, all right, he's going to allow you to do this ability. Your faction may choose one unit from each opponent's captured pile to place into the active field. So if you're facing one opponent or two in a team game, you're going to be able to go into their captured piles, and you're going to be able to release someone. Okay, he's the bind breaker. He's going to get captives back. He escaped himself, and now he's going to help others escape. Every single turn, you may discard 2 cards to recruit any unit in the active field. So you discard 2 cards from your hand, you can get any unit. So again, about bringing people in, releasing them, gathering them. He's someone who people rally around. And then you can activate him for 1 influence. Remember, we were talking about those influence tokens earlier. So this is an activated ability. At any time, if you want to spend an influence, you can activate this. Place 1 unit from your discard pile into your hand. Okay? So again, bringing people into the fold. All right? Hey, wake up, buddy. I know you're tired, but get out here. Come back. We need you. So he's gonna be able to get people out of your discard pile. You see defense 13. Okay? The captains have very high defense, but they're worth it. VP 6. Again, a little bit lower than what you see on some of the location cards, a little bit higher than others. All right, they're kind of in that middle range. And then, lastly, Marshal Adam. 12 combat. When he arrives, you may take control of 1 location in the active field, or each ally player draws 3 cards. So if there is a location in the active field, you can grab it without paying for it. If there isn't, you still want to get something out of the guy, right? I mean, you don't want to come out and be like, oh, there was no locations, he just was a dud, No, each ally player is going to draw 3 cards. That's huge. I mean, 3 cards when you typically only have 5. And that's each player. So if you have 2 players in your faction, that's going to be a good couple of turns. Every turn, draw the top 3 cards of your faction deck. You may use any units drawn to fortify locations under your faction's control. Place the rest back on top in any order. So you draw the top 3 cards. If you find units, you can immediately move them to fortifying a location that's under your control. Okay, so you see he's about locations. And then you can activate him for 1 influence, plus 3 calm, and or cunning. This slash means and or. So you want to do 1 cunning and 2 combat, you can do that. That's just a little bump that you could get from Marshal Adam. We didn't decide his VP yet. I don't know. I guess 5 maybe would be appropriate. These things are going to get worked out as we play test and see how it works out. And then we just kind of have a brief description of it. Okay, so let's stop here. I thought we were going to get further, but it's good that we're talking about this stuff in depth. There's no hurry here. There's no reason why we shouldn't, mine this for everything that it's worth, because the whole point isn't to get through this material, but to discuss board game design. So thanks for checking in. Next time it's going to be the Dwarves of Osaya Lux.